Well, so I grew up, my father is Deepak Chopra. Many people are familiar with him. I grew up in an environment where I was taught how to meditate when I was 9. I taught about concepts like intention and purpose, which we'll talk about. And yet, I would say that it was never my journey. It was just something that my father did and spoke about. And I outlined this messy journey because life, I think, takes you in different directions. And there are times when you feel healthy, connected, of purpose, and then many times when you don't. So the inspiration behind living with intent was I was had my kids. They were probably 8 to 10 years old. I had a company. I was teaching. I was, trying to balance the mom work-life balance, which was not going that well. And I was teaching a group of women about meditation, about, healthy tips for good living. And while I was giving this presentation to this group of women, I was thinking on the back of my head, why did I have that chocolate chip cookie and double macchiato before getting on stage? I need to go pick up the dry cleaning. And oh my God, I forgot to send the permission slip for my daughter's field trip. And I have to send that note to my investors. And I found that I was presenting about being mindful and present in the moment, and yet completely having a double conversation in the back of my head. So I remember being on stage, just taking a deep breath and being like, what's going on here? And I actually told the audience to close their eyes and meditate so that I could deal with my own drama. And so as they all sat there smiling, happy, in the moment, I kind of had to take a deep breath and think about what I was feeling in my body and all of the distractions, and really realizing probably around 40 years old, kids were at a stage where, we're carpooling, driving, they're super busy. I was busy, but not taking care of myself.
Mm.
So living with intent is really that journey of reconnecting with the lessons that I had learned growing up, interviewing great teachers, and then sharing kind of my journey, my messy journey, but in that many of the exercises that helped me find more balance, and it continues.
Mm. And in your book, and you also talk about intent standing for something, right? So tell us a little bit more about that, expand on that. And so you said you grew up meditating, and for those of us that didn't, is intent the same as goal, or is it something different?
So they're very different. So when we were young, after our meditations, my father would guide my brother and I in a phrase, and it goes like this: I am responsible for what I see. I choose the feelings I experience and set the goals I will achieve. And everything that seems to happen to me, I ask for and receive as I have asked.
Mhm.
And he would then ask us, okay, what do you guys ask for? So my brother and I got them. We'd ask for tickets to the Celtics, a trip to Hawaii, new Atari games, things like that. And my father would listen patiently, and then he'd say, okay, but what about asking for love,
Mm.
connection, inspiration, a sense of purpose? And so we were taught on a daily basis to ask for our intentions, what we aspired for in life, what were the qualities we wanted in our life to feel healthier, happier, more connected, and a purpose. So, intents are like the seeds that we plant deep in our soul. They really come from the soul when we ask ourselves very honestly and authentically, what do I want?
Mm.
And they're very different from goals, which come from the mind. Many of us are very goal oriented and successful in our goals. They're things we check off on a list, and have milestones. But intents really are the deeper desires that come from truly being connected to self and listening more than constantly thinking about what we want in our
Hmm,
life.
interesting. So pandemic year was really hard, right? Like we're just kind of out of this very, very tough year. And, I hope your family is doing okay in India. I constantly check up on mine. We both have people we love back there, and it's a very tough time still in many parts of the world. Did that have an effect on you in how disciplined you were with sticking to to good habits. I know in some cases I fell off the wagon, for example, on exercise. It was something completely went out of the window for me during the pandemic year. I'm trying to get back into it. And in your book, you always talked about your love for cupcakes. Did that sneak back into your life? How was the
Absolutely. And
pandemic?
I think that is the messy journey. So I have found that in my life, there are times when you feel like you've got it together, you're connected, you're happy, you're healthy, you're doing your exercise and your diet's great. And then there are these moments that come where, like my moment on stage, but I've had several moments of that where you almost pause and you say, okay, I am out of balance. And the pandemic for sure created for me, lacking all of the discipline that I had. In fact, I wrote a blog in September last year where I just said, I think I titled it Friends, I've Hit a Wall. And I really admitted in that blog that I was totally, kind of fell into a slump. So was not practicing my regular techniques, was totally back on the sugar bandwagon. In fact, I would say I got in the habit, and I believe this has happened to a lot of people. I got in the habit of having like my treat Japanese whiskey that I sometimes have. I got in the habit of having it like every night, like without even realizing it. And so, it was really, um, took a moment of self reflection in realizing that I have hit a wall. And I think when I shared that with people, I got hundreds of responses back because so many people, I think in the pandemic especially, we're kind of falling back into the habits that give us comfort, which not necessarily are our healthiest habits.
Mm-hmm.
So again, it was a time of setting these intentions, making a commitment. For me, it meant spending more time outside, going for walks in nature. So I may not be doing my regular intense exercise, but at least being in nature, getting to a yoga practice, being a little bit more disciplined in my diet, and of course, a regular meditation practice.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk about regular meditation. It's not easy for many people. It's really hard. And I meditate and I have been doing, I would say, since my son was born. So now 27, he's 27 years old. So I've been doing it every day. But in the beginning, I really couldn't sit still even for a minute. It was really hard because there's so many things that go through your mind, right?
Mhm.
Any tips for people who struggle with it? I guess first, did you ever struggle with meditation? You said your father taught it to you and you must have been practicing since you were a kid. But do you still ever struggle, holding your mind still? And do you have any tips for people that are just beginning to get into it or want to try it? Any advice?
So I learned how to meditate when I was 9. And I will admit again that I'm a very irregular meditator. So, I'm about to turn 50. And so I have gone through decades now of meditation, and I can reflect upon my practice, which is I've gone through phases where I meditate once a day, twice a day, go through months or years without meditating, and then rediscovering it. So, the first thing I want to assure people is that we all are trying to figure it out. There, you should never feel guilty or stressed about not meditating because that's completely antithesis to the practice and what it's meant to be.
Hmm.
It is a journey. I also am a believer that you find the practice that's right for you, and at different stages of your life, that may be different. So, my children also learned meditation practice at 5, 6 years old. My father taught them, but I've watched them also. Sometimes they practice, sometimes they don't. My younger daughter is more into martial arts, and that's been a wonderful way for her to find connection. For some people, they can't sit still. So, finding other forms of whether it's through yoga or time in nature or running. My recommendation, though, to people is honor silence. So if you are doing those things, don't try to listen to the podcast at the same time, or really go out and spend time. If it's in nature, going for a walk, just quietly and being aware of what's happening around you. So I have now written a number of books for children, And in those, I share many, many different tips, which are presented for children, but honestly are the same whether you're an adult or a child. So a mindful walk, a mindful meal, to breathing exercises, to a mantra-based meditation or affirmations.
Yeah, that's so great. I mean, for me, I am one of those people that has trouble sitting still, even for 5 minutes. For me, I find a lot of peace, and I guess find it meditative when I'm painting. Art can be another form of meditation, can it not? I think because when I'm painting something, and I'm a self-taught artist, I sort of like get lost in what I'm creating. And so the process of creating whatever it is, for some people it's cooking, and so it could be painting, it's
Absolutely.
whatever
Yes.
absorbs your mind, right? I think that's
Absolutely. It's art, movement, quiet time, and creativity often comes from when we're not busy thinking of our goals or achieving our goals, when we give our space to connect to spirit and something that's larger than us. That's kind of when we often express.
hmm.
And so all of these practices, are also healing. Like they're good for our body, they're good for our mind, etc.
I think even forgiving ourselves, right? Because we're so hard on ourselves sometimes, especially if we're goal oriented or you put yourself down sometimes. I think meditation also helps us heal that way. You've written many, many books, and by the way, the books you've written for children, just for our viewers here, is called the Just Be series. So if you're looking for those books, those are amazing. But you've interviewed Deepak Chopra, your dad, as well as Eckhart Tolle, some amazing people that are very inspiring. Any stories that you can share with us through your conversations with your dad or through Eckhart Tolle?
Yeah, so when I had that moment on stage where I was like, oh my God, my life is kind of a mess. I don't even know how or why. All I know is that I'm really tired. And I am a little like lost. So actually, the first conversation I had was with my father. I went. I'll share this story. I went back to San Diego for the weekend. So as I mentioned, my kids were probably around 8 to 10 years old. So for me and my husband, the way that we would be able to relax is we'd go to my parents' house. So my mom could take care of the girls, cook dinner. Like my mom basically always does that for the
Like
family.
moms do.
Exactly. So that was like our escape. So we had gone to San Diego for the weekend, and my mom was cooking dinner. My girls were probably watching a movie. My husband was exercising, and my dad was sitting at his computer on Twitter, I think, tweeting away. And I decided that, you know what, this could be a good time to just check in with my dad. He's an expert on this. So I said, Papa, I want to talk to you about something. And he was kind of mid tweet. And I said, I feel like I'm not feeling balanced. I'm a little confused and unhealthy. And I remember my dad just kind of pausing and looking at me, kind of panic stricken. And then he's going and looking for my mom, because in my family, when there's a problem, my mother takes care of it, not my father. The rest of the world may go to my father, but we all go to my mother. And so I remember he looked like panic stricken for my mom to come and like talk to me. And I said, no, Papa, it's there's nothing major going wrong. It's just I'm unsure.
Hmm.
So I literally saw him take a deep breath and go from panicked father mode to Deepak Chopra mode. And then he shared with me the work of Dr. Dan Siegel, who then I went and interviewed for the book. But Dr. Dan Siegel, who talks about the mind body platter and the different things that are healthy for our brain, to find balance, to find rest, to be healthy. And so that became a balance wheel that I share in Living with Intent, which really looks at everything from physical, mental, a sense of purpose. Do you like what you do every day? In fact, I share specifically about rediscovering joy through the book club with my friends. That was something that really helped me as well. So my dad and I developed this balance wheel, which I share, in the book club and in workshops. And then I had the opportunity to, reach out to people. So I talked to Marianne Williamson, Andrew Weil. I thought, oh, let me go talk to Andrew Weil about my sugar addiction. And I went and I did this whole um, presentation to him about my food and my habits, and he ended up telling me a story about an owl and synchronicity and purpose. So but it ended up being a brilliant conversation. So each of the conversations became something very special. I remember I flew to New York to speak to Carol Stern, the CEO of UNICEF.
Mm.
And I thought, okay, if there was one person in the world who, like, to me, represented living with purpose, Carol Stern was that person, because every day she wakes up as the CEO of UNICEF, saving the lives of children. And I remember being very prepared, going into her office and um, with my questions, and she was at her desk, which was super messy. She had a suitcase next to her because she was about to take a flight to Darfur, I think. And she was on the phone saying to me, sorry, I just need to take care of something because her middle school son had forgotten his math homework. And so she was trying to coordinate with her husband how to get the homework assignment there. And I remember like just thinking, oh my God, she's a mess just like me. Like, it's fabulous. Like, it was very
Everybody has their
nice.
mess.
Exactly. So yeah, wonderful conversations. I shared one of them, which was really a highlight, which was my meeting with Eckhart Tolle, which really provided this theme in living with intent
Mm.
around what is purpose and how do we live our purpose. And so that's a TEDx talk now, which people can watch. But and I think we're sharing it in the book club. But in essence, I remember at one point saying to him, like, I just feel like a soccer mom who's trying to get by and doing other things. And he talked to me about the frequency holders, the everyday people who are living with intent in whatever they are doing and raising the frequency of the planet, and really shared like that's what living with intent is.
Hmm. Interesting. So yeah, it's you mentioned soccer mom, and in May we are celebrating Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month, and like me, you grew up in an Indian American household here, and you mentioned that when for you keeping in touch with Bharatanatyam, and which is a dance form from the southern part of India, was sort of like a connection back to your heritage. But for your children who were also growing up here, it's very different, right? It was martial arts and soccer. Can you talk a little bit about becoming a soccer mom? Was that a transition? Did it feel like you were adapting to a new culture or losing touch with your old culture? How did you balance all that in your head?
Yeah, no, it's a good and important question, because I think many of us as immigrants, coming from immigrant families, are still uh, finding identity, and that's actually one of the things that I talk a lot about in Just Be You, my recent book for kids, is like, where do we come from and how do we define and identify ourselves? And so for me, growing up in Boston, my parents, when they came here as young immigrants, their entire community were Indians. It was the other doctors, who had come, and that was our family, and extended family. And to this day, are my parents' closest friends, even though my dad has gone off and, lived in different places, and my mom, her core is still that Indian community. And as kids growing up, I grew up with my cousins and I grew up with the other kids in that community. So I always had kind of my school identity and then my Indian community identity, which for us was actually much stronger than my school identity. So my mom and my chachi and my mom's best friend, the three daughters, took Bharatanatyam because that was what we did on Saturdays. So when everyone else did soccer, we never were part of that. My brother ended up kind of doing more sports, but my parents were never involved in the sports. Like, I don't think they ever went to a game or anything like that. They just didn't get it. But then I'm American, I grew up here, and for me, my social circle was everybody. My brother married a Chinese American, and so they also have, my nephews half Chinese, half Indian, so identity keeps changing. And I would say, for my children, I tried to get them to do Bharatanatyam. My older daughter did it for maybe a year and then said, forget it. And my younger daughter looked at me like I'm nuts. She's not even going to try. And I realized, you know what? I don't have to force them on that path. And so I do remember with my daughter, and I talk about this in Living with Intent, kind of my epiphany moment is like there was my daughter, we she be joined the AYSO soccer, and every Saturday we'd go. My husband and I would go like very awkwardly to these soccer games because my husband's actually from India, and so we'd go with like our double espressos and like standing on the side, and all the other parents are like really into the coaching, and we're just kind of there and feeling very awkward. My daughter hated soccer, and she just happened to be on the soccer team where they kept winning, and and so we felt like she had to be a good teammate, and so she'd keep going to these games until they reached like some regional kind of thing. And I just remember finally at one point my husband and I just actually admitting we hate this, and she hates this too. And it's not who we are. If that was who she wanted, what she wanted to pursue, all for it. But when she discovered Taekwondo, that was something that she connected with. So I think as my parents were the immigrants. I'm first generation. My kids are second generation. My nephew, is mixed. We're all figuring it out, and the world is changing. But I think from a value standpoint, the values of family, kind of communication, of honoring kind of our elders, some of these core values, which I would say my sister-in-law, who's Chinese, actually has similar values, and other family members who, may not be Indian or have grown up in Indian. You find similar people when you partner. And so, in that way, I do feel we're continuing tradition. Also, because my husband's from Delhi, and my family's very close, and I was very fortunate. I think some of us are very fortunate that we had grandparents while we grew older, just because they were young when they had kids. We tried to go to India as much as we can so that my kids are very connected to India.
Mm. Yeah, it's interesting the immigrant experience. I think some of our core values define who we are, but how we reflect on those values, we get adapted to wherever we are, right? Because we are now in America, we're American, we're fabric of the society, but some of the core values of having a connection to the family, or treating your elders in a different way. I think how you show that is different for kids that have grown up here versus for someone who's grown up in a very different environment. That's such a great message. I think it's something that, as a society here is becoming much more heterogeneous and much more mixed, I think it's really, really important that we respect a person's true core identity and true core values and try to understand that, and focus on the similarities versus the differences that we all bring.
Yeah.
That's a great message. And so, speaking of children, I think you talk a little bit about meditation, mindfulness, intent, all this, which are difficult concepts, right? Even for an adult, even for a professional like me. I mean, talk about the difference between intent and goal. Sometimes we mix it up. I'm sure there are parents listening into this and joining us. How would, as a parent, we explain what intent is to a child?
So I have a pretty strong opinion when it comes to parenting and meditation and mindfulness and all these concepts, which is don't even worry about your kids. So people are always asking me, how can I get my kids to meditate? How can I teach them about intent? I'm like, don't worry about it. What is your practice? So I believe it's really about, as a parent or an adult, finding your practice, and teaching by example, not words. So when we grew up, my parents never forced my brother or I to meditate. Rather, we knew that when we came back from school, usually around 4 o'clock, my mom was doing her meditation and she'd invite us to join us. Sometimes we did, sometimes we didn't. My dad would do these, practices where he'd ask us the questions. So, like I, shared before, asking what we want, and then kind of teaching us through the conversation. but it was really my parents' journey. And what we saw is that when they were practicing, our family life was healthier and happier, and we were more in communication. So that's my first thing for parents, is don't worry so much about your kids. Rather focus on yourself, and then your kids will learn from that. The reason I wrote these books for the Just Be Serious, it's just, I actually have them here. It's just
Mm.
breathe, just feel, and just be you. And they're really focused on kind of uh, just the practice. So this is the thing, we can spend forever, and I think many adults spend a lot of time intellectualizing, wanting the research, understanding the benefits, doing a practice because it's supposed to help with insomnia or focus or whatever it may be. I'm actually finding that with children, they just enjoy doing the practice. Like, they love doing breathing exercises. They like going for a mindful walk. When you ask them for words of affirmation, they want to share like crazy. So these books are really only focused on practice, and the practice is actually the same whether you're an adult or a child. And so for me, it's more about sharing the experience, and then through the experience, kids will naturally um, actually practice. You don't even have to like explain it to them. They know that when they have butterflies in their stomach and they take a deep breath and blow those butterflies away, they feel better. They don't need to understand all the science behind it and justify it. So that really is my goal with kids, is to give these practices. And what I'm finding, which is so different than when I grew up, and my father was considered the witch doctor who was selling snake oil, and really attacked in many ways. What I'm finding now is 30, 40 years later, it's the kids who are teaching their parents. They are the ones going back and telling their parents, just breathe, or do you feel your feelings, where do you feel them? And so many of these practices that I'm able to share now actually are part of curriculum, and are part of education now as well.
Great. Yeah. So, just a reminder for those of you that are joining us as participants, please ask your questions. You can post them either in chat or in the Q&A icon at the bottom. If you have any questions for Mallika, I'll be going to audience questions in just one moment. So, please feel free to ask them there, and I will read them out and get them to Mallika. I'll keep an eye out for those. So, Mallika, you talked a little bit about mindfulness and meditation, and at the beginning when I started meditation, I was a little bit confused about exactly what is mindfulness. Is mindfulness being calm? Is it being present? How is it all of this thing? I still wonder, is there a difference between mindfulness and being meditative? How would you
The
differentiate
way I
what is?
explain, yeah, the way I explain it to kids really simply, is meditation is a practice that quiets our mind.
Hmm.
Mindfulness is being aware of our thoughts, our body, and what's happening around us.
Hmm.
And then we can use movement like yoga, to feel also more connected to our breath and our body. So super simple. And for me, meditation was the practice that I grew up with, which was a mantra based meditation. And so through that practice, with meditation, many people use breath or mantras. But mantra is translated as man for mind, and thra, which is the root for instrument, or trident. So mantra is just, as we share in kind of our traditions, many of the wisdom traditions from India, mantras are basically tools to settle down our thoughts or to fulfill certain intentions through sutras. So a mantra is often a primordial sound. So you can think of the sound of the wind blowing through the trees, or the sound of the waves of the ocean. So mantras are actually cognized from saints based on those primordial sounds, which are just soothing to the physiology.
Hmm.
And so that really is like, and what we do, and again, most people don't need to understand all the science behind it, especially kids. I often, with groups, Western groups, or children, we'll use I am as a mantra. So I am, because that's easy. But the essence of that sound is the infinite to the finite. So I am, which
Mm,
is similar to om, or amen or amma or
mm.
mama. It's a soothing sound. And so we can use I am as kind of one way as a mantra based meditation.
So, can you use basically, you're saying any kind of a sound that soothes us, use that in a repetitive way to
Yeah,
help
yeah.
us calm down. I didn't know that actually. So that's great to know.
Yeah. And
Uh,
there are different traditions, and different sounds in Jewish traditions or Buddhist traditions.
mm,
But often if you look at it, different sounds have different effects on our physiology.
yeah, great. Okay. Still waiting for any questions. So while I'm waiting for questions from the audience, um, if you were to have one takeaway on what living with intent is, what would that be?
So that's a big question, but I think it comes down to asking yourself, what do I want?
Mm,
And actually listening, in an honest and authentic way. So, in Living with Intent in the book, I use the acronym INTENT.
yeah, yeah. Tell us about what that.
So I is, for incubate, which is really for me, it's finding your quiet practice.
Mm,
So for me, it's meditation, but it's incubate really represents that idea of planting a seed. And when we put a seed in the ground and put the dirt and let the sun and the rains nurture the seed, we don't know what it's going to blossom into. Maybe we know it's a rose seed, but we don't know what the rose will look like. So really, the seed is that idea of intention, and it begins with kind of being quiet, like you described, painting,
mm,
or through a meditation practice, like kind of finding that quiet space and asking, what do I want?
mhm,
So incubate is really the first quiet phase. N is for noticing, which is really where the mindfulness comes in, but noticing, your internal dialogue, noticing how your body is feeling, noticing, the people, places, and circumstances that happen every day, because often there's a synchronicity there. T is for trust. So
mhm.
trusting, when you ask yourself, what do you want, that you're trusting the answers. So for many of us, as women, and I know for me, I would often say, oh, like I want a career, I want degrees, I want, all these other things, but I want to be a mom and I want to be at with my kids. And, this being really honest and authentic about, if an intention is coming from an ego place of ego versus non-egoic intents, and that's something I talk to Eckhart Tolle a lot about. E is for express. So E is really the point in which we can kind of say, this is what I want.
Mm,
And for me, that's really important because it's taking ownership of
mhm,
what you want and stating, like, this is important to me.
mhm.
And when you do that, then your attention kind of shifts, to areas to fulfill that intention. N is the next N is for nurture, which is, learning to say no, stop feeling guilty. Like so many of the things as women that we do, asking for help. It's about community. And then the final T is take action. So I do believe in goal setting, but I believe that when you set smart goals, knowing your intention, then it's easier to achieve those goals.
Mm.
So take action really is critical, because we don't want to just kind of live in like a fantasy world where we just say we want these things. Like we need to then, take action as well.
That's great. I think for me, the hardest thing is to say no and not feel guilty. I'm one of those people
Yeah.
that have a hard time saying no. And I always say yes to everything and everyone, and then feel overwhelmed and feel like I can't deliver. So that's just something that I guess we all have to be aware of, right? That's also an art to try to say no in a realistic way where the other person, people do understand that there are many demands on our time, and when you have to decline something or say no, people do understand. We underestimate that. We do have one question from Jason, and the question is, are there any apps or digital tools that you recommend for people trying to live a more mindful life?
Yeah, so it's interesting because of course there's been this explosion in the last 5, 7 years of apps, which I think is fantastic, because I think it's just broadened exposure to these practices. Of course, growing up, we were so used to my dad being attacked all the time that it's so interesting that now it's become like such a popular business venture, which I think is very typical, often of what happens in our society now. I will though. Tell people about the Chopra app, which I think is really special because I think what we are trying to do is maintain the authenticity of the wisdom traditions in how we're presenting knowledge. And so, that really has been the basis of what we're doing. Traditionally, my dad was doing these 21-day meditation series with Oprah, which I think helped create exposure. We just launched one with Alicia Keys, and so those are probably kind of the windows in which kind of a broader audience comes in. But then on the app, like we really, I think, have special meditations. I've created some for children as well. So I would suggest that. But that being said, you don't need an app. You don't need tools. Like you don't need a timer on your clock, and you don't. And for many people, of course, the guided meditation helps them, but you can also
Just
breathe.
do it,
Yeah,
right?
you can go for
Yeah.
a walk outside and just listen to what's happening around you. You can use like an I am meditation. You don't have to go and spend hundreds of dollars to learn. You can just start practicing.
Yeah, I agree. I think for me, meditation, like I was saying, is painting. I paint on the weekends. I find that very meditative. Reading, I would definitely suggest reading. I find that very, very calming when I pick up a book. And speaking of reading, please join Mallika's book club. She's reading her book, Living with Intent. You can find that on Fable, and also on our blog, we've written under viewpoints on the Fable website. You'll see other resources that Mallika talked about, pointed to there. I meditate every night, and the way I do it is I basically, before I go to bed, I light a candle, I turn off the lights. Somehow, candlelight allows me to just be calm. As I said, I started 20 some years ago with just doing it for a minute or so. Now I do it almost for 20 minutes. So I think it is just practice. It's just a practice of just getting the thoughts out of your mind and just sitting quietly and being calm and noticing things, as you pointed out. I think it can be as easy as that, but
And I
learn
would
a
also,
lot.
yeah, I would just recommend for a lot of people, they think it's so the idea of starting is overwhelming.
Yeah.
It's what you described as perfect because it also you could do it for a minute. You don't have to like commit 20 minutes. Like, and what happens is that once you start a practice, it actually becomes part of what you want to do and how you relax, and you associate relaxation with that practice. And so you may start off with a minute and extend to 3 to 5 to 15. Some days it may be 5, some days it may be 20.
Right.
You do what you can.
Exactly. Well, thank you for that. Some great insights. I think the few takeaways I'm walking away from the session is the difference between intent and goal. Intent is something that we seek with our heart and our soul and our emotions, and goal is something that we define with our mind. I love the acronym intent, all the things that you pointed out there. I love that difference, and we talked a little bit about experiences and how we can interact with children and talking to children about the importance of being mindful. Being mindful is noticing things, as you said. And you also gave us a little tip, which I love. Pick any word that is comforting to you and try to repeat that as a tool, as an instrument. I didn't know that the meaning of mantra was a tool for your mind. So that's something I learned. Thank you so much for an amazing session, and thank you for taking the time to join us today. For for the people that couldn't join or stay for the whole thing, we will have a recording of the session available on our website. And thank you, Mallika, and look forward to reading with you in your book club.
Thank you. And thank you for having me. And I'm so excited about everything you're doing. So, congratulations.
Thanks, Mallika. Be in touch.
Thank you.